Chapter 139. Imperial Concubine, Why Do You Stop Me? As long as I go to Xionghe Palace and expose Tang Cai's crimes in front of His Majesty, the Empress will protect me, and then… Shen Yueji glanced at him. Don't you remember the 50 slaps just now? Do you really think of yourself as a thing? His Majesty and the Empress love each other deeply. Even if this matter is really related to her, do you think you can keep your life if you go after her and keep blaming her? Even if I can't deal with the Empress, Tang Cai has done so many unforgivable things. His Majesty is a wise monarch and will never ignore it like the Empress. Because His Majesty is a wise monarch, Tang Cai will die if you go after him. If you don't, Tang Cai will die. Why do you bother to go after him? After she finished speaking, Shen Yueji no longer paid attention to him. Instead, she turned to Shuangxi beside her and said, "It just so happens that I have just entered the palace, and there aren't many servants in Phoenix Palace. You can place them all in my Phoenix Palace and find an imperial physician to treat them." "Yes, Your Highness. Thank you for your great kindness, Your Highness. In the future, we will definitely serve Your Highness faithfully." Huai Yang was happy and grateful. He immediately knelt down. Shuangxi looked at him and hesitated. "Your Highness, the Emperor took Tang Cai to Xionghe Palace. Is he going to question him in front of the Empress?" Those maids and eunuchs who refused to expose Tang Cai's crimes in front of the Emperor must have been threatened. Tang Cai doesn't have such courage. No matter what, this matter is related to the Empress, even if Tang Cai doesn't want to admit it. Turning the jade bracelet on her wrist, a serious expression appeared on Shen Yueji's face. However, Ben Gong knows the Emperor's weakness. The Empress only needs to cry and deny that this matter has nothing to do with her. The Emperor will definitely soften. "That's right." She smiled. This matter was done by Tang Cai alone and has nothing to do with her. Even if the Emperor asks for the reason, what can he do? At that time, the Empress can push the dead Yueshio and Mami Li to the blame. She is still innocent. Speaking of this, her tone was more self-deprecating. Innocent. She was the most innocent person every time. Xionghe Palace Feng Zhouqing and Shen Yueji went to Tang Cai's residence together. Jiyu Yuerin's heart slowly became uneasy. In this 1 hour, she had ordered people to go back and check on the outside no less than 4 times. "Your Highness. Your Highness, the Emperor is back." Hearing this, Jiyu Yuyin suddenly raised her head. "Really?" She hurriedly tidied up her clothes and got down from the phoenix bed. Her thin and weak body looked sickly and pitiful. When she saw the bright yellow robe slowly appear in front of her, she had a peaceful and gentle smile on her face. "Emperor." Supported by a maidservant, she walked towards the young and handsome Emperor with some difficulty. Feng Zhouqing stopped in front of her, but he did not hold her hand as he usually did to warm her up gently. Instead, he walked past her and sat down on a round chair at the side. The entire process was cold and distant. This made Jiyu Yuyin feel even more uneasy. Until Tang was thrown into the room by Qiu Yang. "Empress, save me. Empress, save this servant, quickly save this servant." Jiyu Yuyin was alarmed when she saw Tang Cai in such a sorry state. "Emperor." She walked to Feng Zhouqing in a panic. Did Tang Cai really do such a thing? She was so angry that her delicate body trembled. Seeing that Feng Zhouqing did not respond to her, she knew that Tang Cai had been exposed. Chapter 140. If Tang Cai really did such an intolerable thing, even if Your Majesty wants to spare him, this concubine will definitely not let him off. Hearing this, Tang Cai's hopeful face instantly turned ashen. He dropped his head and sat on the ground. Feng Zhouqing's lips curled into a gentle smile. "All right, since the Empress is so reasonable. Qiu Yang. This subordinate is here. Take him away, peel off his skin and chop off his bones. Chop his limbs and throw them into the pond to feed the fish." "Yes. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please spare me. Your Majesty, please spare me." This time, Tang Cai truly felt fear. Peeling off his skin, that was peeling off his entire body while he was still breathing. Chopping off his limbs, any torture that was used on him would make him wish he was dead. He would rather Feng Jiuqing give the order to kill him, instead of letting him feel the overwhelming, indescribable pain and torment while he was still alive and still had a breath left in him. Gao Dezhong stepped forward and kicked him hard. Now you know fear? Your Majesty wants you to have a good taste of having your skin peeled off while you're still alive. The taste of having your flesh chopped off while you're still alive. Look after him, don't let him die. The two secret guards respectfully accepted the order. Yes. Jiu Yuerin's small face turned pale. Her rotting skin was peeled off and her face was pale. She stood in front of the emperor, her small hands holding the emperor's big hands. She stood quietly by the emperor's side with tears in her eyes. Your Majesty, you believe in this concubine, right? Feng Jiuqing's gentle eyes were full of smiles as he caressed Jiu Yuerin's trembling hands. You don't need to explain, I believe you. It's this concubine's negligence. It's all this concubine's fault. If it wasn't for this concubine's negligence, such a thing wouldn't have happened in Xianghe Palace and Tang Cai wouldn't have killed so many innocent people. They are all this concubine's servants in Xianghe Palace. This concubine manages the 6 palaces. Whether it's Xianghe Palace or my sisters, this concubine has always lived in harmony with them. I never dared to cause trouble and distract your Majesty. Your Majesty, this time it was really this concubine's fault. This concubine has caused such a scandal in Xionghe Palace. This concubine's dereliction of duty, please punish me, your Majesty. Jiu Yuyin knelt on the ground with tears in her almond-shaped eyes. Feng Jiuqing looked at her tear-stained face and abruptly helped her up from the ground. Your Majesty, Jiu Yuyin fell into his arms. Wrapping his arms around her slender waist, the man lowered his head and chuckled. This matter has nothing to do with the Empress. How can Zhen bear to punish the Empress? The Empress is still injured, rest well. Emperor. Hearing his words, she knew that he was going to leave. She hugged his strong waist tightly. Your Majesty, don't leave tonight, okay? This concubine is afraid. In one night, this concubine has lost the 2 most important people. Now that such a thing has happened in Xianghe Palace, I don't know what to do. Can you stay and accompany this concubine? The emperor didn't speak. There were too many complicated things flashing in his dark eyes. However, no matter how fast those complicated things flashed, in the depths of his dark eyes, his handsome face, and the corner of his mouth, there was always a faint smile. He patted the woman's thin back. Zhen asked Imperial concubine Shen to help Shen deal with the aftermath. Now, Zhen wants to see for myself. Chapter 141. Jiu Yuyin slowly raised her head from the man's arms. Feng Jiuqing gently combed the messy hair on her temples. Yina is the kindest woman in the world. They will understand Yina's feelings. This was a man who was more beautiful than a painting. He was brilliant, handsome, gentle, and clear like the wind. These thousands of words seemed to be a kind of blasphemy when used on him. Jiu Yuyin raised her head and looked at him. Such a man was the one she was willing to exchange her life for, the man she loved. Even if she knew that he didn't love her. As long as she could be with him, for her, what difference did it make whether she loved him or not? Because the person he loved was dead, a cold corpse. He couldn't have her, only she was alive and standing in front of him. She always believed that one day, 1 year, or even 10 years, there would be a day when he would accept her. Your Majesty, you will let Yina stay by your side forever, right? The man smiled gently, looked at her pair of bright eyes full of expectation, and gently opened his lips. When Yina's injury is healed, we will have a child, okay? Jiu Yuerin's voice trembled when she heard this, and a deep joy spread from the bottom of her heart. She nodded heavily and leaned her head on the man's chest. Listening to the hot beating heart, her face was full of satisfaction. Even the words she said were full of happiness. I will give birth to children for your Majesty. No matter how many children your Majesty wants, I will try my best to give birth to children for your Majesty. At this time in the palace all the places flashed back and forth. The cold wind during the day seemed to be colder than the previous nights. Shen Yueji was held in the man's arms, her head pressed against his chest, and her small body was wrapped in his wide brocade robe. It was warm, even warmer than her Feng Qi palace. She half opened her eyes and yawned in his arms. After dealing with the palace maids and eunuchs, Shin Yueji came back. She had nothing to do, so she fell asleep first because she was sleepy. In the middle of sleeping, she felt someone touching her. She woke up in a daze and found that someone was dressing her. She was so scared that she almost screamed, especially when she saw Mo Wushang's infuriating face. Then, after he put on the clothes, he carried her and began to fly around the palace. Looking at the palace guards below, without waiting for them to notice, she and Mo Wushang had already disappeared. Their speed was even faster than the downpour. In this world, there were no words that could describe their speed. She felt the man carrying her as they flew around the palace at lightning speed. The corner of her mouth twitched. The regent dragged me out of bed in the middle of the night just to fly around the palace with you. I heard from Ji Chu that there will be fireflies in the imperial garden today. Shin Yueji, his face darkened completely. Fireflies. She resisted the urge to explode and glared at the man's peerless face. The man lowered his eyes in confusion. His gaze met hers and confirmed, "En." Shin Yueji felt that the smile on the corner of her mouth was about to freeze. She looked at him stiffly. She couldn't smile at all, which made her hair stand on end. "Regent, can you tell me whose fireflies appear during the day?" Seeing the man's beautiful brows, she frowned. Thinking. Chapter 142. What's more, fireflies appear in the overgrown places like the back mountain at night. The imperial garden is a place where palace maids and eunuchs are everywhere. They are watered every day. How can there be fireflies? Even if the regent doesn't want me to sleep late, you can't come up with such a ridiculous reason, can you? I didn't lie to you. Shin Yueji snorted and rolled her eyes at him, ignoring him. Motherfucker. It was fine that he tormented her at night. Today, she finally sent Feng Joching away, but he still didn't stop. He just came back and immediately came to pester her. It was fine that he pestered her. It was fine even if he stayed in Feng Chi Palace. But he didn't say a word. He just pulled her up and put on clothes for her to fly around the palace. Shin Yueji was scared. She was really afraid of being seen by the secret guards in the palace. How should she explain it to Feng Joching? I didn't lie to you. Looking straight at the woman's indifferent face, Mo Wushang frowned. He held her chin and looked into her bright eyes. Shin Yueji slapped his hand away. I don't care if you lied to me or not. I'm going to sleep now. Who asked you to carry me and fly around on such a cold day? She struggled from the man's arms, but the man held her tightly. Shin Yueji glared angrily at the man's incomparably handsome face. Mo Wushang was stared at by her for a while. His dark eyes looked away and didn't meet her eyes. His handsome face looked angry, which gave Shin Yueji the illusion that he was doing it for her own good, but he was giving her the cold shoulder. Shin Yueji was speechless. She lowered her head in resignation. After being angry with him, she didn't feel sleepy anymore. She snuggled deeper into his embrace to avoid being discovered. Is the regent very free usually? I can understand if you come to my Phoenix Perch Palace every few days, but you come once during the day and once at night. You're even more diligent than His Majesty. After dealing with His Majesty, I still have to deal with you. It's very tiring. Then don't see him. Shin Yueji was speechless. The man hugged her tightly and said in a low voice, only with me. Just as he was about to raise his fist and punch him, he saw the dragon carriage flashing past him through his broad shoulders. That pretty silhouette felt familiar. Shin Yueji immediately patted the man's shoulder and motioned for him to put her down. Mo Wushang carried her and landed on the highest roof of the palace. Following her line of sight, he saw Feng Joching's dragon horse heading in the direction of the imperial study. In an instant, his dark eyes became sharp. Shin Yueji narrowed her eyes. He settled the matter at Auspicious Harmony Palace so quickly. It was strange that he didn't deal with such an important matter as Jiu Yuyin and the palace, and instead went to the imperial study. Shin Yueji realized that he seemed to be particularly fond of the imperial study. Something flashed in her dark eyes. She turned her head and looked at the man beside her. How is the regent's qigong compared to the emperor's? Stronger than him. Two cold and indifferent words. His voice was cold and his expression was like the wind. His whole body was full of cold air. Even the words he said were short and mean, so cold that he wanted to freeze her to death. Shin Yueji was speechless. Ahem. She covered her mouth and coughed awkwardly. Chapter 143. Shin Yueji's face turned pale and red. Regent, I'm not cold, but it was embarrassing. She was embarrassed. The man's noble face was proud and powerful. He put his arms around her waist and rose again. Shin Yueji grasped the man's clothes tightly. When her feet touched the bricks, she slowly opened her eyes. They were on the roof of the imperial study. At the same time, she was also surprised. Regent, I haven't said anything yet. How do you know I'm coming here? Mo Wushang's lips curled into an indiscernible arc. Once he thought of who he brought her to see, his handsome face turned frighteningly gloomy. He turned his back to her, revealing his broad and muscular back. Dressed in a black robe, he exuded an indescribable air of nobility. Shin Yueji didn't look at the reaction on his face. Instead, she lifted her skirt and squatted on it. Her little hands lifted the yellow bricks one by one carefully. To be honest, the emperor stays in this imperial study every day, either late at night or in the day. In addition to a pile of memorials, I'm really curious about what's in it. It's more important than what happened today in the emperor's heart. But the emperor's martial arts are too high, and his mind is more meticulous than a woman's. If he finds out, I'll be finished. Fortunately, the regent is with me. Even if the emperor finds out, I believe the regent will escape with me first. No escape. The man's aura was cold and his voice was cold. Shin Yueji's hand paused and then slowly moved the fourth brick out. She said seriously, we have to escape. If the emperor finds out that I have an affair with the regent, my life will be over. Speaking of this, she saw his tall body standing there motionless with his back to her. Shin Yueji pulled the bricks with difficulty. Especially when she saw the red and swollen scars on her 2 claws, she was angry. She lifted a brick and threw it at him. The man didn't move. The brick hit him and made a muffled sound. It fell at a fast speed. Shin Yueji was afraid of making a noise and alarming the people inside. She pointed to the falling yellow bricks and said, "Hurry up and pick it up for me." Whoosh, a sound was heard. The tall and straight figure flashed in front of her eyes, and in the next moment, another brick appeared on top of the pile of bricks she had piled up. Looking up, she saw the man's cold and awkward face. Shin Yueji instantly smiled and patted the man's handsome face with her dirty claws. Good boy. Mo Wushang enjoyed it. The coldness and awkwardness on his face disappeared, and he lowered his status to help her remove the tiles piece by piece. Ji Chu, who was hiding in the dark, was speechless. Why did he feel that his family's brave and decisive Prince Regent had learned to be a dog in front of noble Consort Shin? Ji Chu rubbed his forehead. This was not a good sign. Inside the imperial study the man was dressed in white, and his slender and straight back made him look like a young woman. Her black hair was like silk, and it hung down like a waterfall behind her head. He stood at the side of the dragon throne, his slender and fair fingers gently stroking the smooth surface of the table. His movements were very gentle and meticulous. Shin Yueji looked down. The dragon table was very clean. Occasionally, the places where his hand touched would have some memorials. Chapter 144. She didn't understand what Feng Joqing meant. These days, other than some matters that happened in the palace, he spent every day in the imperial study. Occasionally, the ministers of the court would come to him to discuss important matters. After they left, he was used to staying in the imperial study alone. It wasn't until late at night when he realized that it was time to go back that he would go to Auspicious Harmony Palace or her Phoenix Perch Palace. Ua, caught off guard, the man's tall body pressed down and held her in his arms in a very ambiguous position. Shin Yueji didn't dare to move or make a sound. She could only use a pair of fierce eyes and stare at him fiercely. Mo Wushang didn't seem to feel anything as he held her tightly in his arms. As long as she looked at the man below, he would tighten his grip until Shin Yueji couldn't breathe. She turned her head angrily. There was a touch of something soft and cool on her pink lips. The smooth and soft touch made her heart beat faster in an instant, thumping non-stop. When she saw the man's handsome and fair face, a hint of pink slowly climbed up his handsome face. Especially the clean and soft earlobe that she had pressed her lips on just now. With both hands covering her trembling heart, Shen Yueji pushed him back a little. Mo Wushang was rarely honest and didn't come closer. His pink handsome face looked especially attractive. Even his pitch-black eyes had a layer of pink that was slowly spreading out. Shen Yueji tidied up the messy clothes on her body and cursed him in her heart. Damn it, he was clearly the one who took advantage of her. She hadn't even felt embarrassed yet, but he was the first to feel embarrassed. He made her look like a ruffian who took liberties with a good woman. Rumble, a sound came from the imperial study, causing Shen Yueji to temporarily put away the restlessness in her heart. She saw that a layer of bookshelves behind the dragon throne was opening up at a slow speed. The man's gaze looked at the slowly opening secret room. His big hand on the dragon throne was slightly clenched. The secret room wasn't big and could only fit one person. Looking at the white-clothed woman inside, Shen Yueji's petite figure felt indescribably familiar. At her waist was a jade pendant that Shen Yueji would never forget even if she died. She remembered that it was the token of love that Feng Jiuqing gave her. She had been wearing it carefully. Later, after entering the palace, she did not know how she lost this jade pendant. She had been looking for a chance to tell Feng Jiuqing, but he was too busy every day and she could not see him. It turned out that the person who had been deceived was not only her, but Jiyu Yuyin as well. She had always thought that the person Feng Jiuqing loved in his heart was Jiyu Yuyin. Only now did she understand that she and Jiyu Yuyin were merely pawns he used. The woman he truly loved was in this secret chamber of the imperial study. He spent most of his time here every day. In the eyes of outsiders, he was a sage who worried about the country and the people, but in reality, he was just accompanying the woman he loved. Shen Yueji only felt endless mockery in her heart. They had been married for 9 years, but she didn't understand him at all. Chapter 145. Seeing that the last cover was removed, the woman's face was about to be seen. Suddenly, Your Majesty, Moon Imperial Concubine requests to see you. Jiao Dezhong's voice came from outside. Almost instantly, the door of the secret room was quickly closed, and the huge imperial study was restored to its previous emptiness. Feng Jiuqing sat on the dragon chair with a flutter of his brocade robe. His face was clear and ordinary, and there was a touch of softness in his eyes. It was hard to imagine what he was thinking about when he stared at the secret room alone, and what expression he had on his face. When he heard the 2 words Moon Imperial Concubine, the man's gentle lips opened slightly, as if he was carefully recalling this person's name. Jiao Dezhong carefully opened the door and came in, and said a few words in the emperor's ear. Feng Jiuqing's eyebrows relaxed, and he was about to refuse. Moon Imperial Concubine said that she has something important to report to Your Majesty. It's about Imperial Concubine Shen. Imperial Concubine? Feng Jiuqing raised his clear eyebrows, and his beautiful fingers tapped on the table. After a moment, he said, "Let her in." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Knock your sister." On the roof, listening to the words that Jiao Dezhong said in the emperor's ear, Shen Yueji couldn't help but curse in her heart. This Zhongsun Wuyue came to see the emperor in her name. What the hell was he doing in broad daylight? Feeling that the man was leaning towards her again, Shen Yueji had nowhere to vent her anger, so she hit him hard and said, "Stay away from me." Mo Wushang's eyes were sad, but Shen Yueji's attention was not on him, so she naturally couldn't see his sad little eyes. When he saw that she was completely focused on Feng Jiuqing, his pair of intimidating eyes gradually turned cold. He stared coldly at that tiny head that kept looking down, and the intense coldness that emanated from his body spread rapidly, as if he was going to drown her in it. Feeling the coldness emitted from his body, Shen Yueji was shocked. The next second, she quickly took his hand, took the initiative to lean on his arms and look down. She did not forget to put one hand on his back, patting him comfortingly. Good, good. The coldness dissipated, and the man was no longer as cold as frost. Even his cold eyes gradually returned to normal, and he looked obedient. Shen Yueji secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. This guy, it was really everywhere, exuding a strong desire to exist that could not be ignored. "This concubine greets your majesty." The woman below was dressed in a long pink dress. Her beautiful face was made up, and her hair was not decorated too much. She looked simple and elegant. Especially that graceful and exquisite figure, and that small voice that was like the chirping of an oriole. It had to be said that Shen Yueji couldn't deny that in this back palace, where there was no shortage of women, Zhongsun Wu's appearance was still superior. Like the other imperial concubines, Zhongsun Wu came prepared. Her left wrist was holding a food box. A pair of watery, almond-shaped eyes stared at the incomparably handsome man in the upper seat. Her pretty face was pink and she wanted to say something. "Emperor, this concubine made some osmanthus cakes and personally brought them to you." Without needing Feng Zhouqing to say anything, Jiao Dezhong had already turned down her good intentions with a smile on his face. Imperial concubine Moon is too considerate. His Majesty doesn't like to eat sweet things. Imperial concubine, please take this osmanthus cake back. Chapter 146. Seeing that the emperor did not move, Zhongsun Wu plucked up her courage and went forward. She put the food box in her hand on the dragon table and opened it considerately. She took out a plate of exquisite and beautiful pastries. Her slender hand took a piece of pastry and handed it to the emperor. "I heard that Sister Imperial Concubine knows that the emperor doesn't like sweets, so she specially added some plain side dishes to the desserts to relieve the grease." The emperor praised her. This concubine is displaying her slight skill in front of an expert, imitating Gui Fei Jejia and using the same method. "Your Majesty, please try this osmanthus cake and see if you still find it greasy." Looking at the pair of fair and slender hands in front of him, they were white and slender, beautiful and exquisite, just like her. The virgin fragrance emitted from the girl was intoxicating. The smell on her body was not as strong as those rouge and powder. Instead, it had a delicate fragrance. At least, after smelling it for a long time, it would not make people feel that the smell was strong. Zhongsun Wu looked at him expectantly, hoping that he would open his mouth and eat the osmanthus cake in her hand. But she raised her hand for a long time, and the handsome man did not move. Not long after, her hand was sore, and her voice was filled with grievance. "Your Majesty, do you feel that what I made is not to your taste?" Feng Zhouqing smiled slightly and brushed her hand away. His voice was soft. "Concubine Yu's skills are as exquisite and intelligent as a person. However, I have already eaten just now." "So you have already eaten? Then there's no harm. Later, I will make the same osmanthus cake and send it to you." The man was smiling, and his elegant and gentle face made Zhongsun Wu unable to move her eyes away. Until his gentle lips opened slightly, and seemingly inadvertently gentle words overflowed from his lips. "I heard from eunuch Jiao that concubine Yu came for imperial concubine Shen?" Zhongsun Wu came back to her senses. Her beautiful face turned pale, and she nodded. Yes, that was all she could say. It was difficult for her to speak, so she stammered. Seeing her dilemma, Feng Zhouqing gently touched the memorial on the dragon table and picked up a book to read. "Concubine Yu, if you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to be embarrassed. I hope I am thinking too much. I only want to say it. When the time comes, Your Majesty will not blame Sister Imperial Concubine." Zhongsun Wu raised her head cautiously to look at him. Seeing that he was not the same as the emperor, she lowered her watery eyes. "Before I entered the palace, I was as close as sisters with Sister Gui Fei. Presumably, the emperor knows that Imperial Concubine Jejia has feelings for the regent." He saw the emperor's hand paused for a moment, but other than that, he didn't say anything. Carefully observing this, Zhongsun Wu was happy but worried. "When we were outside the palace, Sister Imperial Concubine met Prince Regent many times. It was me who gave advice for Sister Imperial Concubine. But I don't know what happened. Just as Prince Regent was about to fall in love with Sister Imperial Concubine, Sister Imperial Concubine suddenly entered the palace and abandoned Prince Regent. During the time I was in the palace, I also went to Fengqi Palace to greet Sister Noble Consort. Who would have thought that Sister Noble Consort would speak ill of me? She completely disregarded our old friendship and humiliated me in every possible way. She even seriously injured my trusted servant girl. Speaking of this, the corners of Jongsun Wuo's eyes were red, but she still wiped away the tears in her eyes bit by bit. I don't know how Sister Imperial Concubine became like this. I left with a cold heart. When I went back, I thought about it. I always felt that there was something that caused a misunderstanding between me and Sister Imperial Concubine. Until today, when I went to Fengqi Palace to visit Sister Imperial Concubine again. Chapter 147. Feng Zhouqing was waiting for her to continue. Seeing that she was silent, he raised his eyebrows slightly. Go on. Jongsun Wuo clenched her fists, her beautiful face filled with worry. She gathered her courage and looked at the young and handsome emperor. Your Majesty must guarantee this concubine that no matter what Imperial Concubine Elder Sister has done, Your Majesty will not punish Imperial Concubine Elder Sister for her crimes. Hearing that, Feng Zhouqing suddenly smiled. The man's smile dazzled Jongsun Wuo for a moment. She was even more confused about the meaning of his smile. Your Majesty, Feng Zhouqing glanced at her with a faint smile. The crime of the Imperial Concubine has to be judged according to its severity. If it is really over, how can I promise you? Jongsun Wuo was overjoyed in her heart, but she still had a worried look on her face. But I know that before entering the palace, I and Imperial Concubine Elder Sister were like sisters. Now that I've entered the palace, although Imperial Concubine Elder Sister doesn't like me in every way and looks down on me, I still remember that last sisterhood. But at the same time, I am Your Majesty's woman. I want to follow Your Majesty loyally and help Your Majesty solve your troubles. I can't bear to see Sister Concubine, who is valued and loved by Your Majesty, do such a scandalous thing and betray Your Majesty. Feng Zhouqing casually tossed the memorial to the side and stared at her for a while with his deep eyes. Jongsun Wuo's scalp went numb. The emperor's eyes were gentle and clear. When they fell on her, there was no majesty. Instead, there was a little more scrutiny. His gentle eyes were scrutinizing her. She didn't know why, but it made her heart flustered for a moment. Your Majesty. The next moment, a warm big hand rested on the back of her hand and gently lifted her up from the ground. Jongsun Wuo was flattered. Looking at the handsome face of the emperor, her pretty face blushed. Your Majesty. Concubine Moon is wholeheartedly thinking of the Imperial Concubine. This friendship is really admirable. But he slightly twitched his lips and chuckled. Is Concubine Moon willing to take responsibility for what you said? Jongsun Wuo hurriedly nodded. Your Majesty, this humble concubine's words are absolutely true, without a single falsehood. If Your Majesty does not believe me, you can personally send someone to verify whether or not this humble concubine's words are true. Meeting the man's gentle eyes, she bit her lower lip. If this concubine dares to be reckless and deceive His Majesty and frame Guifei Jejie, this concubine is willing to kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times, from this concubine's Weiyang Palace all the way to Guifei Jejie's Fengqi Palace to beg for Jejie's forgiveness. Letting go of her hand, Feng Zhouqing turned his back to her. His clear voice was like a cup of hot spring water entering his lungs, comparable to the musical instruments in this world, gentle and light. Seeing this, Jongsun Wuo lifted the hem of her skirt and knelt towards him. I saw that the Prince Regent went to Imperial Concubine Sister's Phoenix Perch Palace and didn't come out for nearly an hour. Shuangxi was Guifei Jejie's trusted maidservant. Before entering the palace, she had put in a lot of effort to promote Guifei Jejie and the Regent. After the Regent entered Phoenix Perch Palace, Double Happiness came out to keep a lookout. Even, all the servants in Phoenix Perch Palace were chased out by Double Happiness. Your Majesty, Jongsun Wuo bit her lower lip. This concubine believes in Imperial Concubine Sister's character. The Prince Regent has a high position and power. If he wants to do anything to Imperial Concubine Sister will not have the strength to resist. Just like the former Empress, Your Majesty. Chapter 148. The little bit of joy in her heart, because of the man's domineering and frightening gaze, disappeared in an instant. She subconsciously took a step back. The man's face was gentle and handsome, but his eyes were like glazed ice blades, piercing her throat and making her unable to speak for a long time. She realized what she had said in a moment of desperation. She was so frightened that she hurriedly kowtowed to the emperor. "Your Majesty, this concubine's mistake, this concubine's mistake. This concubine begs your Majesty for forgiveness. This concubine was too worried about imperial concubine Jejye, so this concubine spoke carelessly. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Gao Dezhong. Your Majesty, this servant is here." Seeing Gao Dezhong come in from outside, Zhongsun Wuya jumped in fright, throwing herself at the emperor's feet, her lovely little face full of tears. "Your Majesty, please spare me. This concubine really only spoke carelessly, without the slightest intention to blaspheme your Majesty." The former empress was fickle, not taking into account the 9 years of husband and wife relationship with your Majesty into consideration, unexpectedly betraying your Majesty, truly deserves to die. This concubine first felt that your Majesty was unworthy, and second, I do not wish for imperial concubine Jejye to become a person like the former empress in the future, disloyal to your Majesty. The emperor's handsome face gradually became covered with a layer of frost. Zhongsun Wuyue's words not only did not make the emperor's anger improve, but instead made it worse. Looking around, he was now like an ice sculpture, emitting a chill that could freeze people 3 feet from head to toe. Not only Zhongsun Wuyue, but even Gao Dezhong, this was the first time seeing Feng Zhouqing like this. For many years, he had been calm and self-restrained, treating people gently, and rarely getting angry. When he was angry, there was a smile between his brows, and he would never be like he was now. His anger caused people to be afraid, and he completely displayed the majesty of an emperor. In fact, during this period of time, an invisible murderous aura spread. Zhongsun Wuyue really felt scared this time. She didn't know what she said wrong in the end. It was reasonable to say that the former empress betrayed the emperor first, and the emperor was infatuated with the former empress, but the former empress did such a despicable thing. She belittled the former empress for the emperor. He shouldn't be so angry. Imperial concubine Moon, the regent has indeed been in the palace these days, but he hasn't taken a single step out of Martin's Sun Palace. Gao Dezhong glanced at Zhongsun Wuyue with an unfriendly tone. In other words, the entire Feng nation belongs to the emperor. A mere harem is filled with the emperor's people. If the regent really went to Feng Qi Palace, would it be up to you, Imperial concubine Moon, to speak? But I really saw it, Zhongsun Wuyue hurriedly explained. Your Majesty, if you don't believe me, you can send someone to check. Until now, the Prince Regent still hasn't come out of the Phoenix Perch Palace. This concubine really didn't lie. This concubine is wholeheartedly thinking for your Majesty. Your Majesty can choose not to believe this concubine, but my Zhongsun family has also contributed a lot to your Majesty. Even if we can't compare to Guifei Jejye, we are still loyal to your Majesty. Bang! A heavy, muffled sound came from the dragon table. Zhongsun Wuyue's eyes trembled as he looked at the emperor's anger. He closed his mouth and didn't dare to say another word. Drag him out. Yes, your Majesty. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, everything I said is true. There is absolutely not a word of falsehood. Your Majesty, you have to believe this concubine. 2 guards dragged Zhongsun Wuyue out of the imperial study. Chapter 149. Her hair was disheveled, and because she was struggling, her hairpins and jewelry had fallen to the ground. Her tears had ruined her makeup. Gao Gonggong, you let me in. I want to personally prove it to the emperor. Zhongsun Wuyue crawled up from the ground and looked at Gao Dezhong with a miserable expression. Prove what? Gao Dezhong looked back at her condescendingly. Imperial concubine Moon also knows the saying of sisters. You know, in the harem, what the emperor doesn't want to see the most is concubines sowing discord, wantonly framing others, and slandering others. This concubine did not. This concubine is speaking the truth. This concubine is willing to use my life to guarantee that if it is false, the emperor will decide. Gao Dezhong coldly smiled and respectfully saluted her. Imperial concubine Moon, it is not that the emperor doesn't believe your words and doesn't believe your guarantee, but compared to Imperial concubine Moon, the emperor believes more in Imperial concubine Shen. Today, The Emperor spared you because of Jongsun Daran. If Imperial Concubine Moon doesn't know what's good for you and continues to speak nonsense in front of the Emperor, then Imperial Concubine Moon shouldn't blame the Emperor for being heartless and not giving you face. After listening to Gao Dezhong's words, Jongsun Wu's face turned completely white. She probably didn't think that the Emperor would turn hostile so quickly. She had always thought that the Emperor was good to Shen Yueji because of the Shen family's face. Even this time, she framed Shen Yueji in front of the Emperor to remind Shen Yueji that even if the Shen family's back mountain was big, how could it be bigger than the Emperor? They were both the Emperor's women. Shen Yueji only dared to ride on her head because her status was higher than hers. Once the Emperor learned of the affair between her and the regent, the former Empress would be like this, let alone her. But she didn't think that the Emperor wouldn't believe her words at all. Everything she said was true, but he didn't believe it at all. Tilting her pale face, Gao Dezhong smiled sinisterly. Imperial Concubine Moon, the Emperor is already annoyed enough dealing with official business every day. Don't come here and cause trouble for the Emperor. As the Emperor's concubine, what I should do is help the Emperor solve his problems, not cause trouble everywhere and annoy him. With a deathly pale face, Jongsun Wu tidied up her messy clothes and hair, and forced a smile. Many thanks for the reminder, Eunuch Gao. I will remember it. The door to the Imperial study was not closed yet. Unwilling to give up, she peered inside. Gao Dezhong guessed what she was thinking and raised an eyebrow. His fat body blocked her line of sight. Imperial Concubine Moon, while the Emperor is still considering Lord Changsuan's face, why haven't you left yet? Gao Gonggong is a favored person by His Majesty's side. This consort hasn't been in the palace for long. In the future, I will have to rely on Gao Gonggong to put in a good word for me in front of His Majesty, lest I act like I did tonight, not understanding His Majesty and speaking nonsense to offend him. Then, Jongsun Wu took off a pair of jade bracelets from his wrist and stealthily stuffed them into Gao Dezhong's hand. Gao Dezhong carefully weighed the weight of the jade bracelets and put a fake smile on his face. Imperial Concubine Moon is considerate. Taking advantage of Jongsun Wu's departure, Gao Dezhong casually threw the jade bracelets in his hand into the grass. Clapping his hands, he carefully walked in. Your Majesty, how do you plan to deal with Imperial Concubine Moon? The anger on Feng Zhouqing's face dissipated, and his gentle and handsome face returned to normal. Hearing this, he faintly turned to look at Gao Dezhong. Gao Gonggong, you should ask Imperial Consort Shen about this matter. Imperial Consort. Chapter 150. In the careful voice, there was a touch of imperceptible probing. Is the Emperor planning to let Imperial Concubine Shen stand up for him? Feng Zhouqing rubbed his eyebrows with a headache. I heard that Jongsun Wu was originally the daughter of Jongsun Daran's concubine. Gao Dezhong nodded. Imperial Concubine Moon has been intelligent since she was young. Whether in appearance or talent, she was above Jongsun Daran's many daughters. In addition, Imperial Concubine Moon was born with a clever mouth and was deeply liked by Jongsun Daran. Therefore, after Jongsun Daran's eldest daughter died of illness, Jongsun Daran raised Imperial Concubine Moon to be a legitimate daughter. But, Gao Dezhong paused, there is one point that Imperial Concubine Moon did not lie about. Before Imperial Concubine Shen entered the palace, she and Imperial Concubine Moon were as close as sisters. Because of the matter of the regent, Imperial Concubine Shen often came up with plans for Imperial Concubine Shen, but she also made Imperial Concubine Shen embarrassed herself many times. Moreover, according to the rumors of the people in the capital, Imperial Concubine Shen was pushed into the water once a month ago. It is said that this matter has something to do with Imperial Concubine Moon. Imperial Concubine Shen is a proud daughter of heaven. Since she was born, she grew up with a golden spoon in her mouth. General Shen and Madam Shen only have one daughter. They dote on her since she was a child. This made the legitimate daughter's eyes turn red with jealousy. In addition, Imperial Concubine Shen is straightforward and never shy. She is a sentimental person. There are almost no friends in the capital that she can talk to. Receiving the Emperor's scrutinizing gaze, Gao Dezhong hurriedly bowed his head. This servant has overstepped. This servant knows that his identity is lowly and should not say much about the emperor's harem. But before Imperial Concubine Shun and Imperial Concubine Moon entered the palace, there was already a conflict. After entering the palace, Imperial Concubine Moon was not willing to accept that Imperial Concubine's status was above hers. Therefore, she used these little tricks to frame Imperial Concubine and make the emperor dissatisfied with Imperial Concubine. In the past, Gao Gonggong has never asked much about the affairs of the harem. The emperor's light words made Gao Dezhong instantly vigilant. He hurriedly knelt down. This servant is afraid. It is really because these days I have seen Imperial Concubine Shun's style and feel that Imperial Concubine Shun is different from the other concubines in the harem. Therefore, this servant could not hold back and said a few more words. Feng Jiuqing's thin lips were slightly hooked. Gao Gonggong also feels that Imperial Concubine Shun is different from the women in the harem. Your servant. Gao Dezhong was about to speak. The emperor's eyes suddenly became dark again. Then, based on Gao Gonggong's observation, will Consort Shun betray Jin? Gao Dezhong's fat face was lifeless, and he found it hard to speak. In the end, he was just a servant. Now that he heard the emperor's words, how could he dare to rashly make a judgment? There's no need to avoid anything. Just speak your mind. I won't blame you. Having said that, Gao Dezhong still wouldn't forget Chung Sun Wuyue, who had been dragged out. Since it was related to Shen Yueji, Gao Dezhong braced himself and clenched his fist. The back of his hand was covered in cold sweat. The Shun family is the founding minister of the empire. They followed the emperor all the way and have made a lot of contributions. Old General Shun had a high position and was highly valued by the emperor. Even if there was no Shun Guifei, the emperor would definitely not touch the Shun family. Moreover, Imperial Consort Shun is the apple of General Shun's eye, the flesh and blood of the Shun family. For such a big matter of marriage, if it was not an outstanding man, old General Shun would never agree. Seeing the emperor wave his hand, Gao Dezhong swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Chapter 151. Gao Dezhong swallowed his saliva again. Compared to the harem, he preferred to answer the questions of the court. Facing the emperor's dark eyes, Gao Dezhong trembled. Your Majesty has given Imperial Concubine Shun an unlimited position and glory. Apart from the title, the treatment of Imperial Concubine Shun in the palace is no worse than that of the Empress. Such favor is something that all the women in the world yearn for but cannot achieve. In addition, Imperial Concubine Shun came to the palace for your Majesty. How could she betray? Gao Dezhong braced himself to answer, only to feel that his tone was getting weaker and weaker. Now he was bought over by that bastard Shen Yukai. When he heard the emperor ask about the word betrayal, his heart was beating fast, for fear of being seen through. Your Majesty, this servant has something to say, but I don't know whether to say it or not. Feng Jiuqing sat on the dragon throne, his slender and white fingers gently rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Let me hear it. In fact, in the emperor's heart, he has long believed that Imperial Concubine Shun will not betray the emperor. Otherwise, he would not have waited for Imperial Concubine Shun to finish speaking and ordered this servant to drive her out. This was a subconscious action, but when Gao Dezhong mentioned it, Feng Jiuqing remembered. He had subconsciously believed Shen Yueji and stood with her. Because at that time, his mind was filled with the image of her grief-stricken face a few days ago, complaining to him with a pale face. She was afraid that he did not believe her and did not give her a chance to explain. She was framed for no reason and did not give her a chance to explain. She said to herself that this feeling was very uncomfortable. Suppressing the discomfort that rose in his heart, Feng Jiuqing laughed at himself and faintly called, Gao Gonggong, Your Majesty. Gao Dezhong was nervous, kneeling on the ground and did not dare to look at the emperor's face. You just said that Imperial Concubine Shun is the apple of old General Shun's eye. No matter what she did, the Shun family has always been extremely protective. Jun has just ascended the throne and the foundation is not stable. There must be many ministers in the court eyeing her. The Shun family and the Jiyu family are Jun's left and right arms. Why don't you think that it is because of General Shen's face that Zhen protects imperial concubine Shen and allows her to indulge in the harem? The young emperor stood up. His slender figure was tall and straight, and there was a smile at the corner of his mouth. This smile was gentle like water, like the sunrise on a clear day after a storm, like the singing of birds and the fragrance of flowers after thunder and lightning. The warmth of the sun after the ice and snow melted in the dead of winter. For a moment, Gao Dezhong was stunned. Even though he was a man, he could not help but be captivated by the emperor's heavenly appearance. Feng Jiuqing's long and slender hand brushed past the thick stack of memorials on the dragon table. Sometimes, even he himself couldn't tell what he wanted. He only knew that if there was any overflowing emotion, he would use all his strength to suppress it. A voice in his heart kept reminding him of power and status. The civil and military officials, the millions of defenseless citizens of the Feng nation. Now, he had everything. However, that voice was no longer there. His heart was empty. A complete heart was missing a corner, and it desperately needed someone to fill it. In the whole world, except for that person, he knew that no one could fill his empty heart. Chapter 152. He only knew that this woman was very similar to her. Her every move, her tone of speech, her demeanor, and her usual hobbies. Sometimes, he would be in a trance for a moment, wondering if she was back. If it was really her, how could she suppress herself for so long and not come to find him, not come to please him, not get tired of lying in his arms, sometimes as gentle as water, sometimes as fierce as claws. When he heard Zhong Sunwu mention that she was in the same room with the regent, his heart was torn. It was because of her betrayal a month ago. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. He saw that the emperor was the same as before. Every time he spoke halfway, he would shut up and stand alone in a daze. Gao Dezhong did not dare to look directly at the emperor. Occasionally, because of curiosity, he bravely raised his head to look at the absent-minded emperor. Only then did he see that his handsome face was sorrowful. There was infinite pain spreading in his dark eyes, like a helpless child. Your Majesty, it's time to eat. This servant will go and let the imperial kitchen prepare. Gao Dezhong carefully looked at the emperor's face. Seeing that he waved his hand, he retreated with uneasiness. On the roof looking at the scene in the imperial study, Shen Yueji's heart was also a little melancholy. She thought that she and Feng Jiuqing had been husband and wife for 9 years. Even if it was just a play, she should have some place in his heart. He had never shown such a sad expression in front of her. It seemed that he had always only smiled to her, a gentle smile, a lingering smile, and a doting smile. Unexpectedly, her sighing appearance fell into the eyes of the man beside her. As early as when her eyes fell on Feng Jiuqing, she did not look away. The noble and extraordinary cold air erupted uncontrollably. The sense of existence he emitted was so strong that Shen Yueji could not ignore it. After getting along with him for a few days, she was gradually able to figure out the reason why Mo Wushang emitted cold air for no reason. She hurriedly raised her hands to prove her innocence. I say, you are too unreasonable, aren't you? Didn't you hear what the emperor said just now? His protection of this consort is only because of this consort's father. The man's cold and gloomy eyes were as cold as ice. When he heard her mention the emperor, deep hatred flashed in his eyes that was hard to detect. Shen Yueji caught it quickly, as if she had found something strange. Does the regent hate the emperor so much? No wonder, you two are. Men who use women, none of you are good. Shen Yueji, Ji Chu, who was hiding in the dark, was speechless. Shen Yueji pinched her thigh harshly to regain her composure and looked at Mo Wushang as though she had seen a ghost. Unfortunately, the man didn't realize that she was looking at him as if she had seen a ghost. His cold eyebrows twitched. Is what I said wrong? Shen Yueji smiled apologetically. Yes, what the regent said is wrong. Whatever the regent says is right. Mo Wushang's tightened thin lips slowly loosened because of the little woman's flattering words. The light in his eyes was not as sharp as before. After staying on the roof for a while, Shen Yueji could roughly understand why Feng Jiuqing liked to stay in the imperial study so much. It turned out that his most precious woman was hidden here. Chapter 153. Let's go back to Feng Chi Palace first. He said that he believed me on the surface, but it was only for the sake of his father. Maybe he is suspicious of me now. She poked the man's strong waist secretly. You took me so far away, and I stayed with you for so long. Now you should take some responsibility and send me back, right? Mo Wushang grabbed her little hand and said lightly, go after seeing the fireflies. Even if, as the regent said, there are fireflies in the Imperial Garden at night, you and I are in such a conspicuous place in the Imperial Garden. If we are seen for so long in the middle of the night, doesn't it confirm Zhongsun Wuyue's words? Moreover, Zhongsun Wuyue, this little bitch, dared to ignore her warning and ran to stir up trouble in front of Feng Zhoqing. If she was not with Mo Wushang, she would be open and above board, and she would not be afraid of the shadow. Naturally, she would not be afraid of him stirring up trouble and ruining her reputation. The point was, Shen Yueji glanced at the extraordinarily handsome man beside her. The key was that she was indeed fooling around with this guy. This time, Zhongsun Wuyue had something on her. In the future, he would definitely pay more attention to her every move in Phoenix Perch Palace. She looked down on the power of the Zhongsun family, and Zhongsun Wuyue could not make any big waves under her eyes. Shen Yueji frowned. Even so, Zhongsun Wuyue was not a fuel-efficient lamp, so she had to guard against him. Since the emperor had asked her to deal with Zhongsun Wuyue herself, she didn't need to be sneaky. Shen Yueji's eyes moved to the elegant, handsome and gentle man in white in the room. The next moment, her chin was suddenly raised. She met the man's eyes, which were full of killing intent again. Shen Yueji's heart trembled. Mo Wushang pursed his lips and stared at her closely. Look at me. Shen Yueji, His Majesty probably doesn't have the time to read the memorials now. With Zhongsun Wu's words before he left, Ben Gong is worried that His Majesty will leave for Fengqi Palace after the meal. I have to take advantage of this time to send me back first. The man's handsome face became colder and colder, and he clearly didn't want to let her go. Looking at his indifferent attitude, Shen Yueji was also anxious. The key was that she didn't dare to make too much noise on the roof, so as not to be heard by Feng Zhoqing. And so, the next round of competition began. Shen Yueji gritted her teeth and glared at Mo Wushang. In less than a moment, he averted his gaze and looked elsewhere. Shen Yueji forcefully pulled his handsome face back and gritted her teeth. Mo Wushang, don't push your luck. You play your game, and I'll play mine. We need to help each other, but if you go crazy in broad daylight, don't drag me down with you. Your Majesty, it's not good. Jiayang Palace is on fire. At this moment, a young eunuch stumbled all the way to the imperial study. His face was covered in dust, and his voice was hoarse as if he was about to cry. Shen Yueji stared at the embarrassed little eunuch for a while, seriously thinking about his words. Jiayang Palace was on fire. She almost subconsciously looked towards the handsome man in the imperial study, but this time, before her gaze could land on him, her chin was lifted by the man beside her again. The man's deep and serene black eyes were even more resplendent than the pearls and stones in the night. He won't go to your place tonight. These few words revealed the infinite joy of the master. Shen Yueji's little face was lifeless, and she looked at the man's naturally handsome face in a daze. After a long time. Chapter 154. The man raised his eyebrows and gave a non-committal response. The fury of the emperor could be heard from the room, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Shen Yueji had no time to care about anything else. Her eyes seemed to be spewing fire as she glared at Mo Wushang. He burned down the Jiayang Palace that he used to live in? Fuck. She hadn't lived here for a long time, but she still had feelings for it. Every time she was upset, she would look in the direction of Mink Sun Palace, causing her upset to become even more angry and furious. She angrily grabbed the man's collar and lifted half of his body. Can't you tell me when you're going to burn me? If such a huge palace were to really burn up, wouldn't it cause sparks and smoke to fill the air? Hey! As she spoke, she looked towards the direction of the Mink Sun Palace. Logically speaking, when such a large palace burned, smoke should have shot into the sky. She turned to look at the man in confusion. Mo Wushang wrapped his arms around her slender waist and looked in the direction of Jiaoyang Palace with her. I only burned some things that she didn't like. Something you don't like? Shen Yueji frowned. Seeing that the man was deliberately keeping her in suspense, she knew that she wouldn't be able to get anything out of him. Don't tell me you intend to sit on the roof of the Imperial Study with me until nightfall? If you're sleepy, lean against my chest and sleep. Shen Yueji, Jiaoyang Palace. The moment he heard that Jiaoyang Palace was on fire, Feng Zhouqing immediately rushed over. Along the way, he didn't even ride the dragon carriage. He rarely used his Qinggong all the way to Jiaoyang Palace. When he heard that the Jiaoyang Palace was on fire, he didn't think of anything else. There was only this place. This was the place where they had stayed before, and there were only the two of them. If even this place was reduced to ashes, he dared not imagine. The fire in Jiaoyang Palace wasn't big, and when he arrived, there were already many eunuchs and palace maids who had started to put out the fire. Fortunately, it was only a side hall that was on fire. Everyone scrambled to put out the fire. Because of the incident from the last time, so long as the slightest mishap occurred in Jiaoyang Palace, it would quickly alarm Feng Zhouqing. Your Majesty, didn't you bestow that golden fan to the late Empress? Jiao Dezhong's sharp eyes saw that the dazzling golden fan was slowly being devoured by the raging flames. Something cracked open in the man's pitch-black eyes. He quickly walked forward. The golden fan was surrounded by layers of fire, and the surrounding area was burning. Other than that, in the middle of the fierce fire, there were many things that he was familiar with. He recognized every single one of them. He still remembered that when he gave these things to her, she was filled with joy and carefully treasured them, not even willing to use them. Regarding this, he had even teased her about it. It was just an object. If it was broken, it would no longer be beautiful, so he would just replace it with a better one for her. She would always smile and say that these things were all given to her by him and that she would treasure them well. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The servants of Jiaoyang Palace jumped in fright. Jiao Dezhong also suddenly knelt on the ground, not daring to look directly at the emperor's bloody hand. His tightly clenched fist was dyed red with blood. On the stone pillars of Jiaoyang Palace, there was a circle of red blood, looking glaring and frightening. Your Majesty, someone must have deliberately set the palace on fire. This servant will immediately order people to investigate. Your Majesty, be careful of your dragon body. Chapter 155. Feng Zhouqing looked at the treasures that were spread by the fire. No matter how rare the treasures were, they couldn't escape the burning of the fire and were soon burned to ashes. He pushed Jiao Dezhong away, ignoring the stinging pain in his injured hand, and walked into the main hall alone with a sense of loss. There was a throbbing pain in his heart, far more than the pain in his hand. He gently touched his chest with one hand, and his handsome face became even paler. Was he really wrong? Jiao Dezhong watched him go in. There was no fire in the main hall, only a side hall. He ordered the busy eunuchs and palace maids to quickly put out the fire, and he waited outside Jiaoyang Palace, waiting for the emperor to come out. He shook his head. Since the death of the late empress, he had seen the empress' performance these days. He didn't believe that the emperor was heartless to the late empress. He clearly had feelings. Jiao Dezhong shook his head. Jiaoyang Palace just had so many incidents yesterday, and now it was suddenly on fire. It seemed that it couldn't be hidden even if he wanted to. Even so, he looked at the frightened and busy servants. As servants of the palace, I won't say too much. For today's matter, watch your mouths. If you dare to speak nonsense, I will cut off your heads. Yes, yes, yes. Eunuch Jiao, rest assured, we won't talk nonsense. Phoenix Perch Palace. Seeing the figure of her concubine from afar, Shuangxi quickly went to greet her. Concubine Moon is here. Hearing the news of Zhongsun Wu's arrival, Shen Yueji's face didn't show much surprise, as if she had already expected it. She didn't get any benefits from Feng Zhouqing, and instead made the emperor annoyed. She wouldn't give up, and would definitely come to confirm with her own eyes whether Mo Wushang was here or not. So be it. Look at your expression. What are you worried about? Shuangxi's little face was sad, and she looked at her anxiously. Concubine, logically speaking, I have nothing to be afraid of when Concubine Moon is here. What is scary is, she looked around, and then whispered in Shen Yueji's ear, the regent is here too. Shen Yueji. What? Shen Yueji's mouth twitched, thinking that she had misheard. Her expression must have been very stiff. On the way back, she deliberately asked Mo Wushang to put her in a remote corner. When the time came, she would come back by herself, so as to avoid being seen by others. Secondly, it was to prevent Zhongsun Wuyue from coming to her Phoenix Perch Palace and being seen by her. This Mo Wushang, put him down? I'm back. Shuang Shi had a mournful expression on his face. The Prince Regent is lying on the chaise longue. As soon as Imperial Concubine Moon came in, she saw the Prince Regent. This servant gathered my courage and asked the Prince Regent to leave. After all, the person who came was Imperial Concubine Moon. The Prince Regent doesn't matter, but this concerns your reputation. And then, the Prince Regent was originally lying on the Imperial Concubine's bed, but after hearing this servant's words, he got up and lay down on the Imperial Concubine's chair. When Imperial Concubine Moon came in, the first person she saw was the Prince Regent. Shen Yueji. He rubbed his aching eyebrows for a long time and pushed her crying face away from his eyes. Go in. Your Highness, Shuang Shi was hesitant. Imperial Concubine Moon must have gone to the Emperor to complain about you. Because of the previous Empress's matter, the Emperor's biggest taboo now is who made him a cuckold. Chapter 156. Ah! His Majesty knows. Naturally. Then does His Majesty believe it? His Majesty means to let me deal with this matter on my own. As for this Zhongsun Wuyue, I remember reminding her once, but I didn't expect her to turn a deaf ear to my words. This Zhongsun Wuyue sees that Your Highness is living too well, and feels that she is better than Your Highness in every aspect, but you are always a head above her. This is the result of her jealousy. Since His Majesty favors Your Highness, you don't need to take into account the past. You must teach this Zhongsun Wuyue a good lesson, otherwise, she will always think that Your Highness is easy to bully, and will always ride on Your Highness's head. Today, when I came to visit Imperial Concubine Jejie, I vaguely saw a man whose figure looked like the Prince Regent. I thought I was mistaken, but today, it seems that I wasn't mistaken. It is indeed the Prince Regent. Inside the main hall, Zhongsun Wuyue nervously peeked at that handsome and tall man. He was half reclining on the chaise longue. His peerless appearance, exquisite facial features, and flawless lips were painted. Every part of him was breathtakingly beautiful. The aura around him was like frost, revealing layers of chill. Just leaning there made people unable to take their eyes off him. After all, he was a man whom she had fallen in love with at first sight. Even after entering the palace, Zhongsun Wuyue had never forgotten him in the depths of her heart. She knew that he hated Shen Yueji, but she didn't expect that after Shen Yueji entered the palace, his attitude towards her had changed so quickly. Her long nails sank into her flesh, and Zhongsun Wuyue's hatred and jealousy towards Shen Yueji deepened. Why is it that she is inferior to me in everything, but everything is better than me? Now, even this man who was like a celestial being was looking at her in a different light. Mo Wushang closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, as if he couldn't hear her words. Zhongsun Wuyue didn't give up. She was still sitting on the round chair, but when she saw that he didn't move, she couldn't help but bravely step forward. Suppressing the throbbing in her heart, she walked to the tea table, poured him a cup of tea, and personally handed it to him. But when she was still an arm's length away from the man, that pair of dark and cold eyes suddenly opened. Zhongsun Wuyue's hand trembled, and the tea in his hand spilled out uncontrollably. Bang! A loud sound rang out. The man didn't move, but the tea in her hand splashed towards his face. His face was drenched from head to toe. Her meticulous makeup today was instantly drenched by the water. She looked extremely flustered. Ah! Zhongsun Wuyue screamed, covering his face with makeup and retreating several steps. Prince Regent. From the beginning to the end, the man didn't even look at her. His eyes that were pretending to sleep matched with his pillously handsome face. He was like a statue. Oh! What did I see in my own bedroom? A mocking voice came from behind him. Jong-sun Woo's slender back immediately stiffened. The mocking voice continued, "You ran to the emperor and said that this empress had an affair with the prince regent, and said that this empress was a lowly person. How long has it been? You're already so considerate to pour tea for the regent and send him off." Every time Shin Yueji said a word, Jong-sun Woo's face would become whiter. Especially when she heard the words "send him off" and "pour him tea." Chapter 157. Shun Yueji's bright and beautiful face could move people, and it was not difficult to see the sarcasm and ridicule in her bright eyes. She suddenly felt that she was in a difficult position. His heart was filled with panic and fear, and he knelt down with a thud. This concubine doesn't know what imperial concubine Jejie is talking about. When did this concubine tell His Majesty that imperial concubine Jejie had an affair with the regent? Why didn't this concubine, Pa? She slapped him in the face. Jong-sun Woo covered her face and glared at Shuangxi angrily. She was frightened, but she was still strong and calm on the surface. The panic in her eyes betrayed her mood at the moment. How did Shin Yueji know what she had said to the emperor? The emperor loves me so much. As early as when you were driven out of the imperial study, he had already ordered eunuch Gao to tell me the whole story. He also specifically allowed me to deal with you at will. This is a private matter between me and imperial concubine Jejie. Shin Yueji walked past her and went in front of Mo Wushang. She was going to find a round chair to sit down first, but she glanced at the handsome man on the imperial concubine chair. She smiled and fell into the man's arms. Mo Wushang took advantage of the situation and hugged her. His eyes, which had been pretending to sleep, opened, and his cold and inhuman aura gradually dissipated with the beauty in his arms. It was not difficult to see a layer of warmth on his cold and peerless handsome face. He gently held Shin Yueji in his arms, slightly straightened his body, and adjusted his sitting position so that she could sit comfortably in his arms. Her slightly red and swollen little hand stroked the man's handsome face. Looking at Jong-sun Woo's wide eyes, she proudly said, "Imperial concubine Jejie didn't see wrong. This concubine is two-timing and has an affair with the regent. Imperial concubine Jejie, do you want to go to the imperial study again and call the emperor? Let him see it with his own eyes." Jong-sun Woo's face alternated between green and white. He looked incredulously at Shin Yueji nestled in the arms of that extraordinary handsome man. The indifference of the past had been smoothed out, and on his handsome face was a kind of strange doting and care. She didn't know the regent like this. He was cold, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. He didn't get close to women and hated women to the extreme. But now, how could this be? Didn't the regent hate Shin Yueji the most? Since when did the two of them get together? Since when did he become so protective of her? When she got close to him just now, she could feel the strong killing intent from his body. Shin Yueji was already sitting in his embrace, but not only did he not push her away, he hugged her even tighter. If it was really as he guessed, that Mo Wushang had feelings for Shin Yueji, Jong-sun Woo didn't dare to think about it anymore. She suppressed the uneasiness in her heart, clenched her fists, and knelt on the ground, not daring to move. After a long time, she forced a smile and said, "What is imperial concubine sister talking about? Even if imperial concubine sister and prince regent really have an affair, it is a heaven-sent marriage. As a younger sister, I should be happy for elder sister. Elder sister has liked Prince Regent for so many years, and now Prince Regent finally responded." Shin Yueji covered her lips and chuckled, interrupting what she was about to say. Jong-sun Woo's face was extremely pale. She struggled to get up from the ground. "I won't disturb you and the Prince Regent." There was a scream. Her back knee was suddenly kicked by someone. The pain made her body, which had just stood up, instantly kicked back down. Chapter 158. Shuangxi proudly raised his chin. Did Imperial Concubine Moon forget what Her Highness said just now? Imperial Concubine Moon ran to His Majesty to frame Her Highness, and you want to leave? Is that possible? Does Imperial Concubine Moon want to deny it? Eunuch Gao is His Majesty's trusted servant. Sometimes, his words represent His Majesty's words. What? Could it be that eunuch Gao lied to Her Highness? Zhongsun Wu's face was full of fear. Tears fell like rain as she kowtowed to Shen Yueji. Elder sister, this concubine knows she was wrong. This concubine is to blame for speaking nonsense. As she said this, she fiercely slapped her own face. She clenched her fists so hard that both sides of her delicate face instantly swelled up. Her tears fell like rain as she kowtowed in repentance. It was this concubine who didn't know what was going on and suddenly ran to His Majesty's place. In order to gain His Majesty's attention, this concubine spoke nonsense. Elder sister, you have to believe that this concubine didn't mean it. This concubine swears that in the future, this concubine will never make such a mistake again. Her appearance of tears and snot falling like rain really made one's heart ache, especially for such a beauty. If it was anyone else, they would feel pity for her. Unfortunately, that person was Shen Yueji. She came down from the man's arms, but before her feet could touch the ground, the man's big hands wrapped around her waist and she sat back down. The man's chest was broad and warm. She turned her head to look at the man's handsome face, but because she was staring at his face, she momentarily forgot what to say. Mo Wushang held her chin, his plump fingers rubbing against her smooth chin. Ji, better looking than her? For some reason, Shen Yueji followed his words and nodded. It was true that Zhongsun Wu was a beauty, but 10 or 100 Zhongsun Wu couldn't compare to a single hair of Mo Wushang. Seeing her dazed response, the man was satisfied. The big hands around her waist tightened, and Shen Yueji's delicate body moved closer to him, her head almost touching his chest. Ji will help you decide. Kill or cripple. When the man mentioned Zhongsun Wu, his cold and heartless words made Shen Yueji suddenly come back to her senses. Because of Mo Wushang's interference, Zhongsun Wu's frail body was shivering and her lips were trembling. His eyes were filled with fear and dread. She knew of Mo Wushang's ruthless methods of dealing with people. She knew that in his eyes, there was no status or background. Only those who offended him would die miserably. He didn't care about anything else. She didn't expect Mo Wushang to change so quickly in just a few days. He had already changed to the point where he could make decisions for Shen Yueji. Shen Yueji's face turned black. If Mo Wushang really decided to kill Zhongsun Wu for her, wouldn't that prove to Feng Zhouqing that she had an affair with him? She secretly wiped away the cold sweat on her forehead. This is a private matter between me and Imperial Concubine Moon. There is no need for the regent to worry about it. Besides, she smiled considerately. Lord Zhongsun is also an old minister in the court. If the regent kills Imperial Concubine Moon without saying a word, I'm afraid it will implicate the regent and leave a bad reputation. The man gently held her chin, his fingertips rubbing it gently. Chapter 159. Mo Wushang's eyes darkened, and he quietly let go of her. Instead, he hugged her in his arms. For you, my reputation is nothing. She was just deliberately trying to annoy Zhongsun Wu. Shen Yueji didn't expect that this guy would make it real. Unable to struggle out of his arms, Shen Yueji became well-behaved. She glanced at the pitiful woman who was crying with jealousy in her eyes. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows with a headache. Did Imperial Concubine Moon forget that when you left my Phoenix Palace last time, you promised me again and again that you would never cause trouble for me again? Your concubine, I gave you a chance because you were just a pawn of the family, so I didn't want to lower myself to your level. But how did Imperial Concubine Moon repay me? I am not a good person. You have caused trouble twice. If I let you go because of soft-heartedness, not only will I worry about whether I will be framed by you again in the future, but I can't stop the mouths of the concubines in the harem. They will think that I am easy to bully, and then they will come to find trouble with me one after another. Third, I did have an affair with the Prince Regent. At this moment, my heart is empty, and you are the only one who knows the truth. It is reasonable to say that I should do as the Prince Regent said and kill you directly. Seeing Zhongsun Wu's face change, she turned and smiled. If I kill you, I will not be able to explain to the Emperor, and father will not be able to get in touch with Lord Zhongsun. How about this? Shen Yueji pinched a piece of pastry and slowly put it into her mouth. Shun Yueji scrutinized her for a while and said, "Since you can't control your mouth and still don't learn your lesson, I will cut off your tongue. In this way, you won't be able to open your mouth and speak in the future. This kind of mistake will not be repeated." Hearing this, Jongsun Woo only felt that her sight was black. Trembling, she looked at her with uncertainty. What did you say? You want to cut off my tongue?" If her tongue was cut off, she would be a mute and would not be able to speak in the future. She had tried her best to gain the favor of the emperor. If she lost her tongue, what was the difference between her and entering the cold palace? Seeing her like this, Shun Yueji thought that she didn't say it clearly enough. She blinked and said with a naive and considerate face, "Was I too reserved? It shouldn't be." She had a puzzled look on her face. "I remember that I've been straightforward enough." Jongsun Woo was frightened as if cold water had been poured over him, and he powerlessly fell to the ground. Her body shivering, she knelt on the ground and stammered, "Guifei Nyang Nyang, this concubine believes that you will not treat this concubine like this. Before we entered the palace, we were like sisters. Have you forgotten all of this?" "I remember it from beginning to end. I haven't forgotten a single thing. This concubine really knows her mistake. I beg Imperial Concubine Jejie to give this concubine another chance. This concubine swears that in the future, this concubine will never dare to do it again." Sister Imperial Consort, Jongsun Woo wanted to crawl towards her. Double Happiness stood in front of her at the right time. Chapter 160. This time, Jongsun Woo was truly afraid. She didn't see the slightest bit of intimidation in Shun Yueji's eyes. She wanted to cut off her tongue, she wanted to destroy her. It was the emperor who personally ordered her to deal with her. No matter how she dealt with her, the emperor's name would not threaten her. She didn't know when the woman who was once stupid enough to be used as a gun by her had completely changed. Only now did she realize that her every move was being seen by Shun Yueji. Not to mention that Shun Yueji wanted to deliberately run to the emperor to frame her. Even if Shun Yueji really had an affair with the regent, she couldn't do anything to her. She now realized that the gap between them was so big. Once Shun Yueji shed all pretense of cordiality with her, it would be easy to get rid of her. There was no need to go through so much trouble. Thinking of this, Jongsun Woo became even more afraid. Without her tongue, she wouldn't be able to speak in the future. Don't talk about being favored, there was no man in the world who would favor a mute, especially the emperor who had a harem of 3,000 beauties and countless beauties. Jongsun Woo trembled, her eyes filled with sorrow. Shun Yueji saw her crying like a pear blossom in the rain, her charming little face looking very pitiful. It would be a pity to cut off such a beauty's tongue. But if she didn't, she raised an eyebrow, it would be difficult to dispel the anger in her heart. Letting her go once was because she was soft-hearted, but she didn't know the difference in severity. She was blind and couldn't see who she could offend and who she couldn't. She couldn't be blamed. She waved her hand. Seeing this, Double Happiness immediately stepped forward. "Your Highness. Imperial Concubine Moon, don't cry anymore. This concubine discovered that your eyes are quite beautiful. Compared to your tongue, tell me, which is more precious, your eyes or your tongue?" Without her tongue, she just couldn't speak. If she didn't have her eyes, she wouldn't be able to see anything in this world. She would be blind. Jongsun Woo's complexion changed. Double Happiness didn't give her a chance to beg for mercy again. She called someone in and dragged her out. Jongsun Woo's pitiful begging voice became more and more distant. Finally, she fell silent. Double Happiness must have thought she was too noisy and stuffed her mouth. Shun Yueji pinched a piece of pastry and slowly put it into her mouth. She glanced at the man behind her and pinched a piece for him. The Prince Regent is really an idle person. You're usually so busy that you can't even see your shadow. But now, you're casually entering my Phoenix Perch Palace in broad daylight. Those who don't know better would think that you're a vagabond who doesn't care about worldly affairs and only knows how to seek pleasure with women. The man raised his eyebrows, enjoying her analogy very much. She got up from his embrace, and this time, the man didn't restrain her. Shun Yueji scanned him from head to toe. "I'll go take a look outside." Then, without giving him a chance to reply, she stroked the hem of her skirt and walked out. Jongsun Wuyue was pressed to the ground by two strong eunuchs. Her exquisite makeup, silk and satin were dirty and messy. Her tears ruined her makeup, and her tightly closed mouth swayed left and right. Once a eunuch's hand touched her mouth, she struggled fiercely like a hot potato. Seeing her come out, hope reignited in Jongsun Wuyue's frightened eyes, and he shouted at her, completely disregarding his status. Chapter 161. Seeing her come out, Shuangshi hurriedly moved a soft mattress for her. Shun Yueji leaned on the soft mattress, her eyes relaxed as she glanced at her embarrassed face. Jongsun Wuyue ignored the suppression of the two eunuchs beside her, struggled to break free from them, and crawled towards her step by step. Ji-er, you can't forget our friendship in the past. You used to call me big sister, and you always asked for my opinion before doing anything. Even your best things, you couldn't bear to use them and gave them all to me. I have always carefully treasured the things you gave me, and I was reluctant to use them. Do you know? I treasure them more than my life, because they were all given by you, Ji-er. As the eldest daughter of the Jongsun family's first wife, in the eyes of outsiders, I am glorious and enviable, but only you know that I have always been my father's chess piece, the Jongsun family's chess piece. It is only because I am beautiful and can speak that my father values me so much. Jongsun Wuyue threw herself at her feet, grabbed her skirt, and burst into tears. They make friends with me because I am the eldest daughter of the Jongsun family and I can bring them benefits. They flatter me on the surface, but they don't know how to make fun of me in their hearts. Even if I am the eldest daughter of the Jongsun family, what can I do? In the future, I will be sent to the palace and married to the old emperor. I won't be proud for long. Only Ji-er, you don't despise me. Only you are willing to make friends with me sincerely and treat me well without any return. I also sincerely regard you as my sister. Ji-er, now I finally have my own way out. I am still young, and I don't want to be ruined like this. I beg you, spare me this time. I beg you, believe me, I swear, I will never go against you again. Ji-er, for the sake of our many years of sisterhood, spare me this time. The girl's face was full of tears, her delicate face miserable, and her voice sorrowful. She pulled her skirt and bowed her head like a dog. Shun Yueji gently smiled, and her fingers gently pinched her delicate chin. This face no longer covered up the hatred and disdain, but was full of sincerity and pleading. But these eyes, her fingertip gently brushed across her eyelids. This flash of hatred still couldn't escape her sight. Imperial concubine Moon, how could there be so many chances? She gently opened her mouth and brushed her skirt, causing her to fall to the ground. Who would have a chance in the harem, a place that eats people up without spitting out their bones? He had given him a chance today, but in the future, he would be the one to die. You know this yourself, so why are you pleading with me? Since you have the guts to do it, you must have the courage to bear the consequences. I didn't come out to listen to you beg for mercy. Instead, I want to see with my own eyes whether this beautiful face with tears streaming down her face, when her tongue is cut, is stunning or frightening. She bent down and whispered in her ear. It seemed that he didn't expect her to be so heartless. Jongsun Wuyue stared at her in horror. Was this the Shun Yueji she knew? I'm just giving you a long memory. If there's a next time, this empress has taken a liking to your eyes. Every time you offend this empress, as long as this empress doesn't die, this empress will take back all the things you have one by one until you die. How about it? Chapter 162. The words that came out of her mouth were enough to destroy the world. Her tone was so gentle, but it made her feel cold all over, as if ice was spreading all over her body. Her blood froze, and there was no temperature. She pulled her up from the ground and threw her to the two eunuchs behind him. What are you doing? You can't even suppress a woman. Be quick. It's time for dinner. Don't disturb her ladyship's meal. Yes, the two eunuchs bowed again and again. Shun Yueji, you can't do this to me. You can't do this to me. You will suffer retribution. Jongsun Woo was powerlessly pressed under the body, and kept struggling. The two eunuchs pressed her very tightly. Her breath was wandering, and the extent of her struggle gradually weakened. Only a hysterical scream remained. Shin Yueji, you can't do this to me. Don't cut my tongue, don't. Ah! A shrill scream pierced the sky. Jongsun Woo only felt that her vision was black. The numbing pain from her mouth made her want to faint. Mouthfuls of blood gushed out of her mouth. She lay on the ground uncontrollably, unable to stop the glaring blood from pouring out of her mouth like a rainstorm. Her mouth was red, and even the red sea of blood on the ground was dyed red by her. In the sea of blood, a piece of red flesh lay quietly. Her trembling hand slowly touched her empty lips. Cutting her tongue was very simple. She just had to suppress her, force her mouth open, and put the knife into her mouth. Jongsun Woo's whole body trembled uncontrollably, and the severe pain quickly spread to her nerves. She was in so much pain that she couldn't speak. She could only look at the piece of flesh lying quietly in the red sea of blood. She trembled all over, holding her head. Her clothes were dyed red with blood, and her messy hair was also stained with a lot of blood. Her whole body stank. She opened her mouth wide, trying to make a sound. Her wide-open mouth was empty, and there was only a mouthful of blood flowing out. She wanted to speak, and forced herself to make a sound, but there was only a burst of a sound. She burst into tears and suddenly glared at Shin Yueji, who was not far away. Her pitch-black eyes were scarlet red, and a bone-piercing hatred and vengeance dyed her eyes red. They were even redder than the blood on the ground. She let out another strange cry and pounced towards Shin Yueji like a monster. Shin Yueji sat on the soft mattress and looked down at her in a condescending manner. Even when she transformed into a wolf and fiercely pounced towards her, she didn't even look at her. Shuangshi bluntly slapped her away. Compared to Shuangshi, who came from a family of generals, Jongsun Woo was just a weak woman. She was sent flying by one palm strike. Her whole body fell to the ground, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Finally, her eyes rolled back, and she completely fainted. You too, send Imperial Concubine Moon back and have the servants of Endless Palace take good care of her. Tell them that this tongueless Imperial Concubine Moon is in a very weak state. If they aren't careful, they might not even be able to keep their life. Yes, we will remember. This is good. Let's see if that little slut Jongsun Woo still knows how to learn from her mistakes. She doesn't even look at herself first, and yet she still dares to dream of fighting with the Imperial Concubine Moon. She simply overestimates herself. She looked at the pool of blood on the ground with disdain. Then, she jumped in front of Shin Yueji and said, Imperial Concubine Moon, this servant will go to the Imperial kitchen and pick out some good dishes for you and the regent. Chapter 163. When she returned to the main hall, she didn't see the man on the chaise longue. Shin Yueji was slightly surprised. He left. When she walked into the inner hall, she saw the man swaggering over her bed. When he heard her movement, he glanced at her with his dark eyes and didn't forget to move inconsiderately. Shin Yueji, looking at the man's posture, he didn't want to leave tonight. She walked towards the man and stared at him in a condescending manner for a while. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she asked, I want to know, what did you burn that the late Empress didn't like? She really didn't know what she didn't like when she was alive. Mo Wushang leaned on the edge of the bed. When he heard her question, his handsome face was as indifferent as the wind. He didn't say anything and didn't speak. Shin Yueji waited for a while and didn't get a response from him. She couldn't help but poke his strong waist with her hand. Are you going to say it? It's rare that I didn't drive you away and even ordered Shuangshi to prepare food for you. You can't not even tell me this little thing that makes me curious, can you? Shin Yueji's whole body was pulled by him and she fell into his arms uncontrollably. This kind of action became a habit after a long time. She didn't struggle. Instead, she subconsciously tightened her arms around his neck. Tell me, what did you burn? Some jewelry from when she was alive. Jewelry? Shin Yueji's eyes flickered and she had some answers in her heart. All the jewelry she had when she was alive was given by Feng Joqing. She still remembered that when she received these treasures, She was overjoyed and careful. She couldn't bear to use them, afraid that they would be dirty and broken. Then she would be the one who would feel sorry. In the past, she treasured them as much as her life. Now, as Mo Wushang said, she didn't like them anymore. Even if he burned them in front of her, she just looked at it indifferently. This guy. Looking at the man in front of her seriously, Shin Yueji suddenly smiled. In fact, only now did she realize that this man was not so hateful. There were still some redeeming qualities about him. Regent, since you are so free every day, how about doing something for me? Mo Wushang grabbed her restless little hand and played with it in his palm. Ignoring the scheming in her eyes, he actually felt that this little woman was extremely cute when she thought she was smart. He would rather she scheme against him more and pay less attention to that man. Speak. A few days ago, I asked Big Brother to help me with some matters in Zhengzhou, but he hasn't returned yet. Big Brother is always indecisive and can't keep things in mind. I'm a little worried that something might have gone wrong along the way. You want me to go to Zhengzhou on your behalf? Hearing his unkind tone, Shin Yueji waved her hand again and again. She hugged his arm and giggled. How can I be willing to let the regent leave me? The regent doesn't lack secret guards with high martial arts skills. You can just send 1 or 2 to Zhengzhou to investigate. Mo Wushang hugged her, his handsome brows slightly furrowed. I will let Ji Chu go. Don't. Ji Chu is your trusted secret guard. If you encounter any danger on your way back, he can protect you by staying by your side. Besides, it's not like my eldest brother doesn't know martial arts. He just hasn't come back yet. I'm a little worried that something might have happened to him, but I'm not worried about his life. The regent can just send 1 or 2 secret guards. Chapter 164. Shin Yueji covered her little mouth. She didn't know if she had cursed him for encountering some danger and he understood her intentions. Prince Regent, actually I won't go back. Mo Wushang's dark eyes locked onto her. I won't go back in the future. Shin Yueji was speechless. Oh, that's true. If the Prince Regent wants to stay in the palace, no one can surpass the Prince Regent. After all, the Jiayang Palace is so big, the Prince Regent can stay as long as he wants. The man's handsome face darkened as he averted his gaze from her delicate face. The sky gradually darkened and the two of them were silent for a long time. The man was still sitting in the same posture, his posture elegant and charming. Shin Yueji was different. Her posture wasn't very good and she was forced into the man's arms. She thought that if she poked the man's sore spot, she would feel better and at least be able to escape from the man's arms. But it turned out. Shin Yueji was really thinking too much. Mo Wushang didn't seem to be paying attention to her, but he was constantly observing her every move until he heard a slight snore coming from his arms. He lowered his eyes slightly and there was something rolling in his dark eyes. His plump fingertips caressed the woman's delicate white face. Then, his gaze landed on her pretty nose. Shin Yueji had a dream. In the dream, she fell into a pool that only reached her waist. She struggled in the pool and wanted to get out of the water. In the end, the water that only reached her waist suddenly rose and spread to the top of her head. She gulped down several mouthfuls of water and couldn't breathe. She kept struggling in the water, splashing and splashing. Until she woke up from the suffocating dream. She opened her eyes and looked at the handsome face that had been magnified countless times in front of her. She was stunned for a moment. There was a delicate and cold thin lip on her lips. It was warm and soft, with a trace of coolness and a strong masculine scent. Her eyes widened in shock. Her delicate lips were ravaged by the man, bringing with it a tingling pain. She thought she was dreaming. This beast. She had a premonition that the man was going to pry open her lips and rush in. She suddenly opened her mouth and bit him hard. Hiss, the man sensed something and retreated. Shin Yueji covered her mouth and screamed in pain on the bed. Mo Wushang's face was filled with confusion. Finally, as if he had realized something, his handsome face darkened. He picked her up from the bed, locked her in his arms, and pried open her delicate little mouth. Fortunately, the little pink tongue did not suffer any injuries. There was only a stinging pain, and there were no visible scars. After a serious examination, the man's stern expression gradually improved. He gently caressed her little face, which was red from the pain. "What are you doing?" "Do what?" Hearing these 3 words, Shinyueji almost laughed out of anger. This damned beast. Every time she was asleep, he would do such despicable things to her, and he still asked her what she wanted. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and threw a punch at him. Mo Wushang calmly accepted it without dodging. Her punch was not light, and half of his handsome face immediately turned green and red. Jun Yang's lips twitched slightly, and the corners of his crimson lips twitched, carrying an indescribable grievance. "Why did you hit me?" Shinyueji was so angry that her eyes turned red. She stared at him fiercely. "Do I need a reason to hit you?" He said in a low voice, "No need." Shinyueji was so angry that her heart ached. This shameless man. Her slightly bulging breasts trembled. The man's dark eyes were filled with strong light, and they fell on her slightly rising and falling chest. "Does it hurt? I'll help you rub it." Chapter 165. Shinyueji angrily slapped his big hand away. "Don't touch me." There was a "pa" sound. The back of the man's hand was also red. Looking at his half-red face and the back of his hand, Lin Mengya felt a little embarrassed. Shinyueji's mouth twitched. Who was the man? Was this guy's skin so tender? At the same time, she took out a handkerchief and wiped the remaining warmth on the corner of her mouth. When the man's thin lips pressed against hers, she couldn't deny that her heart was pounding. Her movements were very heavy, and her delicate lips almost broke. The man saw it, and the darkness in his eyes pierced through. Seeing that the breath on the corner of her mouth was about to be wiped clean, Shinyueji's wrist was grabbed by the man. She was shocked. Her lips were blocked again, and this time, the man kissed her even harder. His warm lips brushed past her thin lips, forcing her teeth open. Shinyueji was about to struggle, but the back of her head was held by his big hand. Her resistance was slowly softened in his arms. Struggling in his arms, Shinyueji grabs the man's collar and exerts a little force. His luxurious robe is torn by her. The man held her little hand, urging her to hug him back. His low voice swept across her earlobe, with a hint of provocation and ambiguity. "Don't rush, take your time." Shinyueji. Damn. He cursed in his heart and wanted to spit out countless vulgarities. However, her lips were blocked by the man, and her closed teeth were useless after his repeated attacks. The man seemed to have given up, and he only tasted her lips slowly. This ambiguous position lasted for an unknown period of time. When Shinyueji finally reacted, she was pressed under the man's body. His tall body wrapped around her small body, and her clothes were no longer as neat as before. She looked at him again. His loose robe fluttered, and his snow-white neck was crystal clear. Half of his neck was exposed, and half of it was pushed away by her hands, which seemed to be resisting and unwilling at the same time. This was a skin that was fairer than a woman's. Shinyueji subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He subconsciously compared his body with Feng Joqing's. She had once helped Feng Joqing bathe, so she had seen every part of his body. His skin was as fair as a painting and as smooth as silk. Now that she compared the two of them, her vision was a little blurry and she actually felt inferior. Why were these two men so perfect? As a woman, she lowered her gaze and looked at her exposed neck. It was indeed fair, but why did she always feel that Mo Wushang's neck was prettier and more alluring than hers? Perhaps it was because her gaze was too intense. The man's cold thin lips curled into a smile. He bent down a little, getting closer to her. You're the first one to look at my body." Bang! She flipped him over and pressed him under her body. The words that Mo Wushang was about to say were slapped back down by her. The corner of his mouth twitched, which was rare to see. Shinyueji took advantage of the opportunity to pull his loose robe down to his waist. His smooth and thin waist was firm without any excess flesh. It was as white as a layer of snow, sparkling and translucent. Chapter 166. When she saw the man's perfect body, the fire in Shinyueji's heart disappeared. If it was just a kiss in exchange for seeing Mo Wushang's naked body, it didn't seem to be a loss. After all, he was a big shot who held great power in the imperial court. He had the most envious identity and peerless beauty in the world. For Shen Yueji, who had lived twice, the rigid etiquette and rigid ladylike demeanor had long been thrown to the back of her mind. No matter how well she behaved, how well behaved she was, didn't she still end up like that? The original owner of this body was born in a family of generals, so she was more free and unrestrained. Shen Yueji caressed the man's delicate skin, and her sharp fingertips seemed to be able to draw blood. The man's dark eyes rolled and locked on the woman on top of him. His breathing was slightly heavy. When her little hand was about to slide down, he actually somewhat lost his composure and grabbed her hand, pushing her down from his body. His white forehead was densely covered with crystal beads of sweat. Mo Wushang found it extremely difficult to move now. Only God knew how hard it was for him to endure. On top of him was the woman he loved the most in his life. Her seemingly casual touch had long ignited his fire to the point where it couldn't be extinguished. At the same time, he enjoyed the feeling of being wantonly played by her, even if she was just a plaything. Mo Wushang's slender fingertips trembled slightly, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. This woman only cared about playing with fire, but didn't know how to extinguish it. Sitting on the edge of the bed with his back facing her, Shen Yueji could only see his straight back, with a slight tremble. As if she thought of something, her eyes flashed slyly, and she slowly wrapped her arms around his narrow waist from behind. Her white soft ears were slightly red, looking charming and beautiful. She leaned over and carefully breathed in his ear. "Prince Regent, what's wrong with you? Why is your body trembling so badly?" Like a snake, she hugged him from behind and entangled him. This was something he had never seen before. Bold, dazzling, seductive. Mo Wushang's dark eyes were rolling with thousands of waves. He suddenly closed his eyes and said in a hoarse voice that could be heard trembling, "I'm going to order someone to help you investigate Shen Yueji's matter." Hearing Shen Yueji's name, Shen Yueji instinctively let go of him. Although it was rare to see this man being humiliated, and she wanted to tease him for a while longer to vent the anger she had suffered from these few days, after all, this matter was related to Shen Yukai. For the sake of her brother, Shen Yueji could only suppress her pride. The little snake on his body finally retreated. Mo Wushang opened his eyes and calmed his throbbing heart. His body was reacting to her. He stood up, not even daring to look at her. Seeing his reaction, Shen Yueji covered her mouth and giggled. Her smile made the man's straight back stiffen even more. He wanted to turn back, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself when he saw her bright smiling face. "Be good and wait for me. I'll be back in a while." Without waiting for the woman to respond, the man leaned over and planted a cold kiss on Shen Yueji's blushing face. Shen Yueji was stunned. When she came back to her senses, there was no longer a man in the hall. She covered her face with her hand, and the remaining heat lingered for a long time. Shen Yueji wanted to scold him, but she didn't know what to say. Thinking of the man's cute face, she was afraid that if this was spread out, no one would believe that the cold and bloodthirsty Prince Regent of Foam Country, who had killed countless people, had a side that was even cuter than a child. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.